Hi, I'm Yulia, and this is the news brief. And today we're going to be talking about whether the recent peace talks are really signifying peace or another trap for Ukraine. And yes, I'm going to be talking into this nifty little mic here because I don't know, it just feels right. As per usual, later we're going to discuss it in the comments down below so you don't have to suffer alone and I don't have to suffer alone. So please do leave your questions, suggestions, feedback, thoughts, anything on your mind. I love reading it and I love having this connection with you guys. So let's get it. So, there are a bunch of events that happened this week that are important to talk about. One of them being that, of course, there were peace talks in Jeddah. We talked a little bit about them earlier this week, but there was not much information, which, to be fair, there is not much information now. But we know they went through, we know Ukraine agreed to a peace deal, and we know that now the ball is in Russia's court, as everyone so poetically said, because to be fair, the ball has always been in Russia's court, right? Because Russia can just take its troops out of Ukraine and end this war today, tomorrow, any day, this hour, really. So Putin came out and said that he is willing to negotiate this peace, although he did not like the agreement, and he put forth his own demands, which of course include no NATO for Ukraine. It also includes no training for Ukraine while the 30-day ceasefire is lasting, no military supplies for Ukraine while that ceasefire is lasting. He also, as per usual, if we can look at the agreement he was putting forth or the demands that he was putting forth a year ago or so, he does not want Ukraine to be able to militarize. He does not want European countries or really any allies to guarantee Ukraine's peace if it's ever attacked. So, in reality, these are not peace talks, these are demands as per usual, and they do not signify peace because Russia is not giving up anything. Russia wants everything. And on top of that everything, Russia also wants to ensure full capitulation of Ukraine. Also, Vitkov has visited Moscow. Of course, there were the talks in Jeddah that we just talked about. Then the sanctions from the US. Then also interesting things happening in NATO because, Donald Trump has just come to visit, and Mark Rutte was convincing him to stay in NATO, and how that might or might not affect Ukraine. Then of course there are Ukrainian troops leaving Kursk, and there is a lot of speculation about that. But don't worry, I'll clear it up for you. And and last but not least, Putin is playing with time. Will Ukraine persevere? Let's see. So on March 11th, Ukraine and the United States came to a deal for a 30-day ceasefire, the conditions to which Ukraine agreed upon. And with that, Ukraine is going to now resume getting intelligence from the United States, being able to get the Maxar satellite images, and also military aid from the United States, which I am not so sure about because we've seen tons of reports from Poland from strategic logistics hubs being dismantled, which kind of indicates that the US doesn't ever want to provide Ukraine with military aid anymore because these are logistic hubs. These are logistics hubs, and that's what they're meant to do. They're meant to be used to provide aid. Personally, I don't trust Trump, and I don't think Ukraine should, but let's see what happens with this. Jeddah became the first step towards peace in a very long time. But don't fool yourself. While all of the Western nations are celebrating that there is this step taken, I don't think, or we here in Ukraine don't think, that Russia is really using this as a step for peace. If Russia truly wanted peace, it would have taken its troops out of Ukraine. Also, many Russian representatives really said that they're not willing to sign any sort of peace with Ukraine because the goals of Russia's war to begin with need to be reached. Also, Russian mill bloggers are losing their everlasting minds on social media, saying that, it would be just unfortunate and not okay and unreasonable to sign any type of peace with Ukraine because Ukraine will just use it to remilitarize. And anytime Russia says anything like that, they're really just projecting what they're going to do. Every single time that Ukraine has signed any type of peace agreement or stalling agreement or ceasefire agreement with Russia, Russia violated it and used the time to remilitarize and attack Ukraine again with a larger force or with a stronger force. So when they say that they don't want peace because Ukraine is going to use this time to do something bad, what they really mean is that we are going to use, actually, I'm going to rephrase that, they're going to use this to attack Ukraine. And it's very evident from the conditions that they're putting forth. One of the first conditions was no NATO ever for Ukraine. The second condition was while the ceasefire lasts, Ukraine is not allowed to train its military. It's not allowed to have mobilization in progress. It's not allowed to receive weapons from allies. Why? Because, of course, they want the Ukrainian army to deflate and to get worse in that time period. So by the time they violate the ceasefire, as they have always done and have been unpunished for, Ukraine is not going to be nearly as combat ready to receive what Russia has in stock for it. Next big event that happened is Vitkov, the representative from the United States, visited Moscow, and he says that Putin is for peace, but he wants everything, which obviously is what we expected this entire time.
President Putin says he supports the idea of the U.S. brokered Ukraine truce deal, but wants to discuss the details with President Trump. But the U.S. president remains optimistic about the possibility of a ceasefire.
Yeah, I'd love to meet with him or talk to him, but we have to get it over with fast. If we get a peace treaty, a ceasefire treaty, I think that leads to peace. That's going to really lead to peace. I don't think anyone wants to go back. They've been doing this for a long time, and it's vicious and violent. And I think if President Putin agrees and does a ceasefire, I think we're going to be in very good shape to get it done.
Meanwhile, the U.S. has tightened sanctions on Russia by restricting payments for energy. Bloomberg's Russia economy and government editor Greg Sullivan joins us now. Greg, what do you make of President Putin's comments yesterday?
Well, there's a lot to unpack here, but clearly this was a message directed at President Trump. So far from the White House, we've seen a lot of one-sided pressure on the Ukrainian side and not on Russia. And Putin wants to keep Trump engaged and committed to his side. Obviously, what we know from Putin is that he's seeking to drag out the process to get a ceasefire, play for time, and get as many concessions, terms on his that are favorable to him as possible. Western analysts have told us they are seeking a maximalist approach to try to achieve that.
Yeah, and yesterday you were talking about the Kursk region, the fact that they've made significant gains, and perhaps they're looking to buy time there so as to call for full retreat of Ukrainian troops from Kursk, which would be a big concession on the Ukrainian part. But what pressure is the U.S. now applying on Russia to get this over the line?
Well, so far, what we've seen publicly, at least, is a pretty one-sided approach. We have heard a few things from the U.S. Towards the Russian side. The Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said that they are willing to apply maximal pressure. And of course, they let these licenses expire. It was sort of done quietly, no announcement, but it is expected to potentially gum up the works in the oil and gas revenue that the Kremlin receives. Still, alternative measures could have been already put in place, so it's unclear what the exact effect will be. But, we have heard Trump say that he's willing to apply more sanctions. So some pressure could be on the line, but publicly we've mostly seen a pretty one-sided
I thought it was
approach.
Interesting that when President Putin was speaking yesterday, he said, and this is a quote, "We need to talk to our American colleagues and partners about this." That sort of language would have been perhaps unheard of a couple of months ago. What does that tell us about the state of the relationship right now between President Trump and President Putin, or between U.S. and Russia?
Well, there's two things that I would say. One is that what we said earlier, this was clearly a message directed at Donald Trump. Putin was trying to speak directly to the president, through the media, through his comments, keep him engaged. But two, as we've talked about before, this has been a monumental policy shift on the side of the U.S. They have gone from trying to isolate Russia to directly engaging them and talking about future economic cooperation, a complete about-face. And of course, the direct engagement between Trump and Putin himself. We are still expecting another call at some point. That remains to be seen, but quite a shift.
On March 13th, Vitkov has come to Moscow after Lukashenko's talks with Putin, the context and content of which we're all unaware of, and came to the conclusion that Putin is pro-peace, but just no NATO. All of Ukraine's occupied territory and territory that Russia didn't manage to occupy, becoming internationally recognized as Russia. So really no peace. These are just the demands they had from the very beginning, right? And of course, no alliance troops in Ukraine. So nothing changed. It's been 3 years and nothing changed. This is still about full destruction of Ukraine. This is still about making Ukraine indefensible and making Ukraine unable to fend for ourselves. Fun. What did change a little bit is that the United States have put forth sanctions for Russian banks, and they also are sending more cluster munitions and bombs to Ukraine. That's a difference. However, on the sidelines here, we know that sanctions is not what needs to happen, right? Trump said that if Russia is not going to be forced into peace and is not going to be willing to partake in negotiations, Trump is going to allow Ukraine to strike more, and he's going to allow Ukraine to basically proceed with bigger force, as in rearming Ukraine, letting Ukraine do there will continue the war and will continue stronger, right? To really kind of tame Russia. But the thing is that he used this statement in such vague terms that it's really easy to not apply. So he said if Russia is not forced into peace, but Russia is acting as if they're actually negotiating peace. However, the conditions that they're putting forth are still the same conditions that they have put forth in 2022 when they invaded, and more. So in reality, they're not willing to give up anything. They're only adding and adding. So this is not a negotiation. This is actually just Russia's demands. But Trump said if Russia is not forced into peace or is not forced into negotiation, right? But if Russia says that here we are willing to negotiate, it's Ukraine that doesn't want to take these absolutely unfavorable, unbearable conditions that are going to mean full capitulation, and we're here negotiating. We're the good guys. And they can just, as always, twist it onto us and make us seem like we are the ones who don't want peace. Yeah, sure. I mean, hey, not being able to defend ourselves, not being able to rely on our allies to help us defend ourselves, giving up all the territory that Russia has occupied and more, the territory that they have been unable to occupy, which, by the way, Russia, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, now holds less territory in Ukraine than it did in the first days of the war. It would take it 150 years at the pace at which they're going today to occupy the rest of Ukraine. And they're losing lots of soldiers, and Ukraine also held a big territory in Russia, and Ukraine held more territory in Russia than Russia currently holds in Ukraine. Russia is not winning this war. Russia should not be negotiating this peace and ceasefire on the conditions as if they are. Russia is the losing side, and Russia also is in wartime economy, which means that all of their resources are going towards the war, and they still can't move at a pace that's giving them something. They still are demanding territories that they're unable to occupy. This is not Russia winning. This is Russia losing. Russia lost most of its fleet. And somehow we're still back in the same time where Russia was demanding all of these unrealistic, unreasonable things that they consider peace talks, while they're just demands and authoritarian demands. So basically, as of March 13th, Putin is not actually agreeing to what the US and Ukraine agreed to. Putin is giving an alternative to this agreement, which only benefits Russia and gives Russia time to militarize, remilitarize, and get stronger and attack again. Then there was this very interesting situation with Donald Trump and Mark Rutte having a conference at which allegedly Mark Rutte was trying to butter up Trump to not pull the United States out of NATO. And then all over the Ukrainian media, there have been things circulating basically saying that Mark Rutte has said that the Ukrainian candidacy in NATO is no longer being reviewed and is no longer something that is being talked about. Also, in Ukrainian media, it was said that Trump said, oh, they knew the answer for the last 40 years. They knew the answer all along. Obviously, Ukrainian bloggers, Ukrainian media, Ukrainian people erupted in this disappointment and saying that it's a stab in the back. So in no worldwide media have I been able to find Mark Rutte saying anything like that. I have only found that Mark Rutte has said a little while ago, about a month ago, that NATO membership was never a promise for Ukraine that came along with peace talks or peace. So basically, they're just giving themselves an out, as they have been doing for the past 2.5 to 3 years. So it's not a new statement. Nothing changed in my eyes. Nothing is different. And I can't find any sort of mention or semblance of Mark Rutte full out coming out and saying, no, we've decided not to review this any further. And this is never going to be on the table and no longer going to be on the table. So I am just going to, completely skip that step. I have an outline of what I wanted to talk about today. And one of the things that obviously the Ukrainian newsroom asked me to cover is this. But as I said, I don't think this is the situation. Maybe there is something that I'm missing. My only sort of analysis from this could be that, this is what Trump said in order to agree with Putin. And this is what Rutte had to follow because he wants to keep the US in NATO. But so far, everything I'm seeing in Western media is, and through my Western media colleagues, is just Mark Rutte trying to butter up Trump to stay in NATO. That's about it.
Sorry, we have to do this, yes.
Mr. President,
Yeah.
you have made it very clear that NATO needs to step up, although great progress has been made in your first mandate. How do you envision this new transatlantic?
Are you talking about NATO stepping up?
Yes.
Well, NATO is stepping up through this man. This man is a man that only knows how to step up. And we have the same goal in mind. We want the war ended. And he's doing his job. He only knows how to do a good job. That's one thing. That's why I fought for him to get that job. Because they had some other candidates that I'll tell you would not have done a very good job.
I need this part of the movie for my family.
So we'll get you a clip. We're going to get him a clip of that little last statement. The rest of the statements he doesn't care.
Sir, how does this new transatlantic cooperation, how do you envision it?
Well, that's one thing. I mean, we're on the other side of the ocean. And they're right there. And yet we're in for $350 billion because of Biden, and they're in for $100 billion. So it's a big difference. and it's unfair. And I said, you have to equalize. They should equalize. They should have. It should have never happened where Biden just gave this money away. Now, as you know, we have an agreement with Ukraine on the rare earths and other things, and that'll get us something back, a lot back. It'll get us our money back. We're not doing it for that, though. I'm just doing this to get the war stopped. I'm doing it really to save lives, but at the same time, we were treated very unfairly, as we always are by every country. And we're in for very substantially more than the European nations are in for, and that shouldn't be. You know, they're much more affected by it than we are, because we do have an ocean in between. But I don't know. I think good things are going to happen. I really do. I think good things are going to happen. I do say, we were talking before, and Mark was very nice. He said, if you would get involved, there would be nothing. You'd just be going on. This thing would have gone on for a long
Breaking
time.
a deadlock. It was crucial.
Yeah, we broke a deadlock. We did break a deadlock. I hope.
Now, I do want to come back to the sanctions against the US and some of the things that the US intelligence are saying. You know, it's interesting to exist in this world of peace negotiations between Russia, Ukraine, and the US, and also Europe being involved, because all of the branches of American government, depending on where their alliances lie with Trump or with the rest of the world, they say different things. So for instance, obviously Trump came out and said that he had a call with Putin and it went really well, and Putin clearly wants peace, and there is there is a chance that the war will end, and he's kind of talking so fondly about Putin. Now the US intelligence actually says um that Putin is not ready for peace. He does not want peace. And also that Ukraine is getting nothing out of these peace proposals. As in, like, it's basically Ukraine capitulating and Russia getting everything Russia wants and more. So this doesn't benefit Ukraine in any way. As in, like, we don't need the United States to negotiate our capitulation. We can, like, if we wanted to be in this predicament, we could have just given in to Russia and their original demands. But we have stood our ground, and even though everyone is saying that, and even though there are a lot of people saying that Ukraine would not have lasted more than 3 days without the US help, that's not true, because Ukraine actually started receiving the first help from its allies in June 2022, which that means, or July 2022, which means that we actually lasted 3 months on our own. And that was when we still didn't know this warfare, when we didn't know how to act in this warfare, when this was like a shock to us, and this was a really, really big situation. It's still a really big situation. But my point is that, like, Ukraine is not nearly as weak as everyone is trying to portray us. ISW and also the British intelligence are all saying that Putin doesn't want peace. He's not looking for peace. He's looking for the best case scenario for himself, where he gets everything that he's demanded this entire time. Now there is this other situation flying around, that has been flying around for a while now, is Ukraine taking its troops out of Kursk one of the conditions set forth by Putin for peace? And is Ukraine retreating because of that? Did Russia, push Ukraine out? No. We simply lost interest in Kursk because Kursk was supposed to be leverage. It's basically a meat grinder. I've spoken to a lot of frontline journalists, and since January, it's been a meat grinder, a really, really bad meat grinder. And we're losing men there, not as much as Russia is. And of course, we're still holding a lot of Russian territory, right? But that territory was supposed to be leverage for negotiations with Putin. But as it turned out, which we knew right away, which we should have known all along, Putin doesn't care about that territory. He doesn't care about anyone that isn't oligarchs in Moscow and oligarchs in St. Petersburg. He does not need any more territory, right? He doesn't care what happens to those people. He doesn't care what happens to that territory. This doesn't give us leverage over him because he simply doesn't care about his country. He cares about his own interests. He cares about imperialism, not expansion because he needs territory and people there or saving people. He just cares about being able to get more territory. So for him, whether Ukraine controls that territory or Russia, how the people are doing on that territory, what's going on there, it doesn't signify anything. So it was just not worth it for Ukraine to keep our troops there any longer, to lose any more lives, to hold what territory that doesn't mean anything to Putin and can't be used as leverage and negotiation to return our own territory. it just stopped being significant to us and we decided to cut our losses and retreat. That is the most likely explanation as to what is happening in Kursk based on the people that have been on the front line reporting on this war for this entire time. So, I really am not a fan of rumors, especially unsubstantiated rumors. And I know that in this time and in this at this time and in this information space, it's really easy to fall for those. So I'm telling you this because I don't want people to be falling for those. So, well, so what do we have here after? So what do we have here overall? Ukraine and the US have agreed to a 30-day ceasefire. Russia agrees to the ceasefire, but only on the condition of the capitulation of Ukraine. So that is not a peace talk. That is demands and that is Russian control. NATO is up in the air because, of course, now NATO has to cater to try and keep the US in NATO and try to keep Trump happy. So we don't know where we are with that as well. The US is pushing Russia with sanctions, which those are so effective. I mean, they are. Don't get me wrong. We need to keep sanctions, and we need to we need to kind of take the loopholes out. But other than that, these are not enough. Then the ISW and the intelligence services of both the US and the UK are screaming that Putin does not want peace. He just wants victory at the expense of Ukraine. Ukraine keeps holding on, and we always do. But at what price? At the end of the day, good always um, defeats evil. But at what price? And after how much time? And of course, I don't expect Putin to compromise. No one expects Putin to compromise, and Europe is preparing, but it's in the hands of Kyiv and it's in the hands of Trump to stop falling for Russian propaganda and to see it from our perspective, the perspective of the nation that didn't do anything wrong and got attacked, not cater to Russia and Putin. Well, that's all I have for you for today. Thank you for watching. And if you've enjoyed this news brief, please do not forget to subscribe and turn on all of your notifications so you don't miss when the next one comes out. Also, as per usual, send it to your friends, family, whoever needs to hear it. Like this video because that helps us in the economics of YouTube and spreading information. And leave your thoughts, questions, suggestions, anything in your mind. I read all of it and I really enjoy staying in touch with you. Till next time.